Hi, welcome everybody. This is Elena Manferdini. I am the graduate program chair of SCI-Arc, and I am now in the spin room talking to you at home about our thesis at SCI-Arc. I will interview a few guests that have been joining us in the past 2 days of reviews, and I will share some students' work, and we'll also talk to Hernan Diaz Alonso, the director of the program. We are now set up live at SCI-Arc. We haven't been here for 6 months, and we set up a screen for you to actually be connected to all the activities that have been going on online in the past 2 days, and they will continue all day today, tomorrow, and culminating in graduation on Sunday. So we're here joined by Patricia Olinik. She has a practice as an artist in New York and St. Louis, and she will introduce herself. She's been a guest of our juries in the past day and a half, and we have a few questions for her. Welcome, Patricia.
This has been a really invigorating day. I know you wanted me to introduce myself. I just stepped down after a 13-year term of director and chair of the Graduate School of Art at Washington University in St. Louis. And I'm a practicing artist. I also have a lot of academic appointments in other units, which allow me to unpack ideas from quite a number of fields by way of my own material practice. So I'm a fellow at the Institute for Public Health, Biodiversity Institute. I have a courtesy appointment in medical humanities, women gender studies, performing arts, and I will soon be named in the Center for Ethics at the School of Medicine. And I also run a program in New York called the New York Laser Program, which looks at work being produced at the Arts Science Technology Nexus. And this is part of the Leonardo Group from the Leonardo Journal, which came out of MIT, and is part of the International Society of Arts, Science, and Technology. Leonardo Isast.
Thank you, Patricia, for the phenomenal presence, actually, in our thesis. I wanted to start this conversation asking you a question about thesis. I know you come from a different field, which is the field of art. I think there are many affinities with the world of architecture, and clearly you're a woman that has seen the production of creative minds in multiple endeavors. I was wondering if you could talk about the diversity in terms of approach to thesis that you find between architecture and artists, if there is such, and how do you approach, from the artistic point of view, this architectural reviews that you've been part of in the past 2 days?
Oh, that's a great and very rich question. We could talk the next 24 hours and I would never finish all my comments. Well, first of all, the thesis between art and architecture. I mean, we are both producers of typically material things, though sometimes ephemeral things, or speculative architecture, or ephemeral projects that live in the art world, only on paper. But the thesis is really the development of a basic kind of premise or a set of issues or questions that are driving your work. The thesis is the way that you actually frame a project, the way that you articulate a place for that project in the world. We know that nothing that is made is ahistorical. So what histories are you looking at? What discourses are you attaching your work to? Who came before you? Where is the work situated in terms of its timeliness and relevancy to the here and the now? So the thesis, I think, is very, very, very critical. It has been my experience that in working with students in art design and architecture, if things are sort of scrambled up here, they're scrambled in terms of the articulation of the thesis premise. So I know in my program, we really work with the students to, not be so far into their heads that they lose the kind of flow that they have in a studio situation, but certainly to be able to critically analyze and understand intention in relationship to whatever is being produced, that there should be a healthy dialogue going on between those two things, and also understanding the difference between what drives a studio practice and what the essential question or issue that work addresses how that gets communicated by the work itself. So, what's been wonderful about the thesis reviews today is seeing how the students in the architecture program, the graduate architecture program and thesis class, are moving towards these incredible speculative projects that take on much larger issues driving contemporary culture. There's nothing conventional or orthodox about any of the projects that I've seen today. And in fact, the drivers of a lot of these projects, I would say, are the same drivers that you would expect to encounter in any artist that has any kind of spatial practice, whether that be an immersive environment, an immersive virtual environment, or something else involving the built space.
Sure. I couldn't agree more that the premise of the work of the thesis is probably has a lot of affinities with the way in which architects and artists go about it, as both are cultural practices in many ways. I was wondering if you have some comments also about the medium we're using for the reviews. This thesis class has been producing their thesis away from school, which is the first time that happens. They've been working fully in lockdown because of COVID for the past 4 months. And also the way in which they present the thesis through the medium of the internet, and has definitely, I think, impacted the way in which they understood the audience or try to talk to the audience. Now, it's always a collaboration with which audience you want to reach during the thesis. And I think the medium of the computer, of Instagram, of social media, of even this green room in general, produces also a cultural factor in the work you do. So maybe you can speak about what you saw in the work through that lens.
Oh, absolutely. Well, years ago, I was experimenting with virtual reality. And so, what are the conditions that are present that produce a kind of immersive environment, right? I mean, it is possible to have an immersive experience in some way virtually, as it is in the built environment or in the world around us in any capacity. There are people who think very long and hard about these kinds of issues. One very well-known artist and one of my favorites, who is also a friend, is SCI-Arc, who engages in a series of bioelective surgeries on his own body. And he also puts himself into these prosthetic devices. And he has always asked the question whether or not the body would eventually become obsolete, whether or not we would be simply absorbed into the realm of virtuality, and that whether or not the corporal body would eventually be downplayed to the point that it would become somewhat obsolete. And what's interesting is that some of the students are making virtual environments, or they're making films. So they're already dealing with ephemeral media in some way, which was a beautiful surprise to encounter when I joined the thesis reviews this morning. And then you have other students who are actually, producing at full scale, and we're encountering these full scale architectural structures by way of the virtual screen. I think what the current moment has made all of us reflect upon is how much we really were always dependent on virtual representations of things for our understanding of the world, and in my case, the history of art and the history of art discourse. I am interested in performance and sometimes teach about the history of performance art. How many of those performances have I seen in person? Maybe 5% of what it is that I teach, if that. So we have always been ensconced in the virtual world and in the screen world. And I think what the current moment has done is it's directed our attention to that fact in a way that has allowed us to think new questions and new ways for the possibility of moving forward in a world where I'm sure we will not be facing our last pandemic. So there's been a shift of the psychological framework around the current moment, but also a reflection on the past.
No, I can see this. I mean, I think everybody somehow acted on a paradigm that has been always put forward before. I mean, for 20 years, we talked about the digital work, and this medium has been there. And there are many levels at which we already participate virtually in this creative medium. And I think at this point, what is interesting, though, is that it becomes the main medium. So it's very difficult to do anything else. And I think it was interesting to see actually how then the thesis had to change to be able to act within and perform within that box. I mean, we just saw one video, as you were mentioning before, of a student that was 3D printing in China, a full-scale building, somehow using and leveraging what we have at our availability to still produce something that was physical at a larger scale. And so that technology that maybe was there before now forces us to be used that at the purest level somehow, that there is no more a hybrid. It seems like the hybrid is gone. Either the digital has taken over and the analog has been pushed backward at this time in the thesis. And it was interesting to see what we do when we are completely plugged. Now, sometimes you could think of working unplugged without digital tools. Now we are looking at the purest sense how it is that you work completely plugged, beginning to end.
Yeah. Absolutely. All of those things are very astute. And, you know, through all of this, what's curious is the redirection of our attention to ourselves. You know,
True.
There's been this really interesting redirection and a re-exploration of what it is we know about how it is we live in the world. I mean, it's become a really kind of a conceptual, you know, psychological kind of interesting kind of mental gymnastics or experimentation. It's really, really a curious time we live in, but it has made me look back at everything that I've experienced and what I know by way of the virtual. It's made me really rethink how I'm going to actually be teaching the history of all the artists that I know who are engaged in virtual practices, and how they were really a kind of precursor for today. But there is a fundamental shift in everybody's behavior right now with regard to shifting to online presence only. I mean, there's a kind of ghost in that machine, don't you think?
I thought today that it's very important to understand the point of entry in any project, in the thesis, and even in the medium, the point of entry in the medium. So it becomes interesting to see that maybe some technology has been out there for a long time and only now has been leveraged to this level. And I agree with you that it's a moment of awareness, because we cannot do without that awareness. I mean, now that you're forced through one channel of expression, it becomes important that we're critical about that. And actually that channel of expression is understood in its nuances. And if it was before taken casually, or there were many things that could go in that box, now it's very clear that we have to organize that box because that box becomes much more nuanced now that is the only one we use in order to create. And I agree with you that all the time we look at a piece of artwork, you then redefine not only what comes at the end and after that, but also somehow it organizes your understanding of the artwork before. And I think that also happens with architecture. When something new happens, there is a point of entry in the project. And I think thesis is that awareness of understanding how your interest somehow has a place, a meaningful place in a lineage of work that has been done before, and how then your project can change the way you look at the past and somehow maybe and hopefully change the way in which we could do, at least partially, things in the future. So I think that that moment of awareness is where the students somehow transform from being students to being architects, let's say. I think it's a transformative moment, the one of thesis. I mean, I'm sure you've seen this in many ways. It's not just about your personal interest or the interest of your instructor. It's a moment where you own a discourse and you somehow position your discourse within the discourse of other people. And I think doing that through this specific medium of the TV and the digital and the screen has for sure made us aware of the history of the digital that happened before and what will happen in the future in a much more specific way than it was done before, I think, now.
Absolutely. And the affect of that, I think, will also make us much more ocular centric, because of course the experience of an immersive space is temperature and smell and sound and all, and whether or not you have spatialized sound and how all of this, you know, creates a kind of crescendo of experience in some way. There's the kind of sensorial apparatus being, filled from every direction. And now we have the screen, and we have this highly ocular centric way of experiencing what it is that we're sharing with one another. And so this is very interesting as well. The philosopher Martin Jay talked about the primacy of the eye, right? And I do think now there's going to be some interesting writing coming out of the ways in which the Umwelt, or the unique sensorial apparatus of humans, is going to be experiencing environments by way of the screen. It's a completely different experience, right?
I couldn't agree more. I was looking at a show that just opened in March, and it was about the sense of touch. And in a way, and clearly, little did they know that the exhibition was about to close a few days later, actually. And the whole exhibition was about how touch has evolved, actually, as a way of interaction. And there was part of the installation that was about digital touch, or intellectual touch, or emotional touch, that had nothing to do really with the physical one. And it became interesting to me to realize that at the moment where touch might never come back, shaking somebody else's hand, or a hug, or those kind of connections that we understand as being basic of the human relationship, already had a big shift through the digital medium, and how those mediums are even transferring the idea of touch into something that is visual sometimes, or is even sound oriented. And so it is true that certain element or certain sensorial quality, then aspect of our experience, are maybe toned down, versus other are turned up in this experience and awareness.
Right.
So Patricia, thank you for your fantastic insights on the world of architecture in thesis. I want to thank you for your time, and send you back to the reviews. I'm sure that Marcin is waiting for you. Thank you very much for the time you have had with us today. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. And we'll see you back in reviews.
Fantastic. Thank you.
We are now going to see some of the students' work in the background of the spin room. And we're then also going to talk to Donald Dace, who has been also in reviews with Patricia. He will join us to discuss thesis. As you know, we have 86 students that are graduating this weekend. And we have 25 faculties that have been their advisors during the summer. And over 100 guests from all around the world that has been spending some time with us today, yesterday, and tomorrow. The students have been asked very difficult questions during the summer, because they had to question, I think, what you do in thesis. And usually thesis is the moment where students question everything that is around them. And I think this questioning somehow is a question that all of us had during the pandemic, during this social awakening. I think many of us had to think about what we do as architects. And so I think a little bit the thesis is not just the thesis of the students, but it's also the thesis of us as a community. How do we relate to each other in the community? What is the role of architecture in the large sense? And how we define our roles in architecture in general. So we're now seeing a few projects in the screen. So to give you a sense of what the students are now doing, this is a project of Shri. This is called Monumental Ephemera. It's a project that is located in New York. Is actually a piece of New York that has been built as a park that has been built to withstand the element and a big flood that would happen every 100 years. And she was tasked with the idea of what do you do with a public space that is usually understood as an infrastructure but is a phenomenal real estate. How can you occupy a public program like this one with a personal experience? And what Shri is proposing is a set of 5 theaters on park, and those 5 theaters are at the end going to be submerged by the water. What is interesting about the project is that it questions the idea of temporality. I think there is something to be said about architecture thinking of itself forever, or architecture thinking about itself for a certain amount of time. And the moment you think that the experience of architecture is ephemeral and could be on a short time, this actually unleashes a lot of possibilities in terms of how you can speak to an audience of today, and how also the experience of architecture can change and resonate with the immediate culture. So I think we're seeing in the back some of the videos she produced with the submerged experience of New York. This is another project of Yash. He is a student of Hernan Diaz Alonso. It's a project that I have not advised, so I'm not sure I can tell exactly what it is about, but definitely is a place of imagination and creativity and rutilant effects. Yash has been a student, a fantastic student actually, in the MR2 program, and I think the work speaks about the creativity of our students and their ability to imagine a world that doesn't exist. And I think that's actually a very important part of thesis, is the speculative aspect and the creative aspect of the work. This is a project by another student in MR2. His name is Kumaran. He designed the so-called Z-object. He is questioning the status we're in today as a domestic experience at home. During COVID, the Z-object is the status that we all are in. We're all now on our cell phones, on our digital platforms. The Z-object is basically the object that one has to have to live a Z life. And he says that although the Z generation is a specific generation that is connected to media and tools in a specific way, he says today, because of COVID, we're all dealing with a Z life, and he's giving us a sense of what the potential of intermedias could actually offer. And so he's creating the domestic landscape where instead of having a phone or having an iPad or having a screen, you actually have an interactive environment where you can work, live, and socialize. And so it becomes interesting what you do when you understand those platforms in a design way, it's a customized way, rather than having tools that we understand be in our pockets. So we are gonna discuss soon with Donald Bates. He is joining us from Australia. So the time zone, it's quite long. He is, I don't know, 15 hours ahead of us, before us, something like this. So we're gonna welcome him. He has been great cheer during these 2 days. And we will also ask him a few questions about thesis.
graduating thesis project. My project is to design the sustainable city for the future in the China. My presentation is all on the website. I will share the link for you now. And Manuel, I'm going to share the short video presentation. You can watch direct from the link that I give you, or you can watch the Zoom. Yeah.
A city is a large human settlement. It can be defined as a permanent and densely settled place whose members work primarily on non-agricultural tasks. Today, a global crisis, food security, climate change, and a waste crisis are changing our vision of cities, creating entirely new prototypes which integrate agriculture and city into one place. SCI-Arc is a prototype of city planning that engages directly with agriculture and social communities to build a contemporary city with zero net impact. To reach this goal, SCI-Arc will be built under 7 key principles: a culture of community sharing, mass mobility, smart city technology, modular construction, urban farm, net zero energy, and zero waste systems. In April 2017, China announced Xiong'an as a new district to be transformed into a mega modern metropolis to rival Shenzhen's special economic zone and Pudong. This new district is around 100 kilometers southwest of Beijing. This prompt from China has been taken on as an architectural challenge by the Venice Biennale. This project will be included in the 2021 Venice Biennale as one possible proposal for the future of Xiong'an. The first step for SCI-Arc is creating water circulation by digging the land to build a river and creek. Next is to build infrastructural systems and green space on the original ground floor, which will be changed to a service floor. It also includes the belt conveyor for a transportation path. When the systems have been set up, the harvest floor is created for agriculture and livestock. Rapid transit will be built next. There will be a station every 500 to 800 meters. The last step in setting up the city will be modular buildings, which can have many functions in the city, such as residential, commercial, office buildings, community schools, and sports centers. SCI-Arc will not have a road as the main mode of transportation. Instead, the belt conveyor system will be a more powerful means for navigating the city. It runs together with rapid transit, for example, a self-driving float bus and a flying skateboard or scooter, which all use a maglev system to operate. SCI-Arc will apply a collection of standardized self-development and smart architectural city models that explore possible solutions to urban agrihood, renewable energy, water management, and waste management. The city is designed to produce a variety of food to self-sustain our citizens, and thus overcome a food security crisis. The urban farm includes livestock, fish, honey, poultry, and eggs, aeroponics, hydroponics, seasonal garden, a wetland garden, and a greenhouse. SCI-Arc is designed to build a renewable energy system to provide many forms of energy, both biological and clean sources that derive from waste products and nature. Biogas will be produced from animal manure, and solar energy, wind turbines, water turbines, and heat exchange are examples of energy sources which stem from the environment. SCI-Arc will use landscape to help the environment by creating a constructed wetland which utilizes plants to help filter or purify water. SCI-Arc also has a wastewater treatment facility and a treatment swale to clean wastewater completely. Lastly, SCI-Arc will create an alternative way of waste product treatment. Instead of destruction, CityX will take all products to a recycling and reuse processing plant. CityX will create a sharing culture in which all members can exchange or share goods. For example, toys, furniture, electronics, and cloth. CityX is not a utopia, but a real urban proposal where new ideas about city systems may be tested and refined. This is Yong'an. This is the future.
Yes, and next video, I'm gonna present you the games inside of my website. It's about the learning game in the city. So the first level is about the city transport system. That's how you're gonna get anything. The second level is about the your backyard, like you can do the harvest on the back of your housing. The third level is about the agriculture, learning how you gonna produce the milk or the harvest the grass. The fourth level is learning city mobility, how you gonna move from one to the second. That is an example of the game that I'm show you. You can play more in the website also. So I'm finished to present my thesis now, and I will make the video rerun, and then you can comment.
Just one comment before we continue. We've just been joined by Mimi Zeiger. And Mimi, I just gave a short introduction to you, but we asked all our critics to introduce themselves. Would you mind just to
No problem. First, apologies for coming in late. I'm a critic and curator based here in LA, and I am a faculty at SCI-Arc teaching a course this semester called Other Futures.
Thanks. And if did you get the links, Mimi, in the chat, or can you see those?
Yeah.
I can give you.
Oh, I can't see the previous chat links,
Oh, okay.
but.
Can you repost them, please?
Yes, sure. I will.
Thanks.
Is the game playable in this version on the web? I'm trying to not split attention. Is the video you showed us of the game, is that a kind of proof of concept, or are you can we actually play it?
Yes, you can play it on the link that I give you.
Yeah. And will you, that's great. I want to play it. I'm not going to play it now because I want to talk to you, but can you just make sure it stays up for like another day or two so I can have a chance to play it? I think that's all very impressive.
It's a online 24 how you can pay anytime.
But is the game conceptually a way to learn about the city, or is the game a way to like model the city or make the city? Like it shares graphics with it, but I'm trying to understand. Yeah.
Basically, the idea of the game is just like a learning how you gonna survive in this city. Like for example, if you are the new resident and you want to living in this city, you don't know, like, because this city is very different from the city today now. Like the city it doesn't have road, the city doesn't have the basic facility as we living now. So that's why I'm trying to find a way how to present and how to learn how to teach them know how to living in this city. Yes. It's the learning how to living in this.
But I guess this is the thing that I find so interesting about the proposition, because I love the graphics, I love the thinking, the video. I'm watching this thing and it's like a kind of reminder of the last 30 years of good intentions in city making, like all of them. So some green fields, some mobility, some smart, like they all have come back and they're all going to get synthesized in the project, which I think is fine. I just sort of realized, oh, that's what urbanism is. It's a collection of best practices that come together. I'm just trying to figure out, because at one level, it seems more rigid than a typical city. And in another level, it seems like you want to make it super flexible. So like there's the modular building and there's the game idea. And where it's like, this is where we're going to come and we're going to try new things. And so the whole notion of the city as an experiment. And then there's the notion of the city as something that's already there before you. And so when you say like, oh, I'm going to play the game to learn about the city, that to me seems like an older model of the city. The city precedes me, I come into it, I adapt to its logic. Whereas I feel like the promise of what you're talking about with the notion of the modular buildings and the conveyor belts and things plugging in and out is like, I make this city as I experience it or as I live in it, I change it. And so there's a possibility of a more interactive city. And I think for me, the video is like by its nature instructive. It gives you something. But I think the game for me conceptually opens up another mechanism where it's like, oh, you know what? It turns out maglev scooters didn't work. So we're going to take that plug-in away and replace it with something else. And that's where I feel like there's a difference between your plug-in city or your plug-in buildings and the infrastructure seems very fixed in relationship to other things that seem very flexible. And I just wonder if there's a more open-ended plug-and-play sensibility that could permeate the entirety of it.
Yeah.
But I hate dead air, so I keep talking. No, but this is all to say I love it. I think the graphics are really smart. I think the game's really smart. I think, at this well thought out, like both as a proposition and as a thing. So very impressive.
Thank you.
I'm coming in late, so you probably already answered this in your proposal. But what happens within this sort of world in relationship to crisis, right? I think this kind of goes to John's point about problem solving for the better good in relationship to kind of the large systems of planetary crisis. But I think, what we're seeing sort of right now in California and in other places, the kind of localized crisis, and does that sort of begin to generate new conditions within the urbanism, and this is sort of to the point of the flexibility that maybe goes outside of the parameters of sort of the large-scale urban thinking.
At first, the idea of this city is design how we gonna overcome the situation that we face right now, like the food crisis or the climate change. So that I'm look forward to build a city that not harmful to the environment and also treat the people who living in the city to have all they need compact in the one city. That's why it's come to like the city that have their own production, like the farming and clean the water by themselves before get out of the city. That is like the main idea of this city. And then I move forward to how to link the social together by I'm just thinking, so that is become to the culture of community sharing, because the first of this concept is instead of we just throw it away, we just take it and reuse it again. That's why it's come to the idea of this city. And this one is also totally the new city. So that is like we can completely design the new thing into this project. That is the first of the proposal of my project.
So I guess another way to say that is risk is not, this is not built into the game. Like how do you fail or lose at the game?
The game is not have the fail. It's like the game that will be force you to go to the direct way. It's not like an open game that you can game over, or you can need to restart the game if you do it wrong. They will treat you and build you to go to the right way and make it right for the project of the city. Like if you want to get the food from the farming, you just order it, and they not have another choice that you can do. They just have like a one or two choice that you can do, and it's right choice. That is like not the open game that like in the online that you can play. This game is like the learning game that is a little bit easy, and like you can learn it from that after you finish the game.
But there's the question of the game, and then there's the question of the city. I mean, I want to be synonymous. You've told us that they're different. So I think maybe these questions also just go to the city. Like watching this, I date myself, but this is like the original Sim City, which was Axon based. Everything went fine, and you had to really dial in a disaster to disrupt the system. Otherwise, it was just like the care and feeding of the solid state system. And so as a city, can it change in relationship to failure? Not even crisis, not even external crisis, but say there's too many eggs or not enough this. Is there a way that it can self-regulate?
For now, the game cannot do that way, but it's a good idea to go forward to do something like that, like learn from the player and adapt it to the city. Yes, but for now, the game cannot go to your point. Yeah, because of like it's a lot of to calculate it. And also this city is like the future that the China plan to looking, and maybe they can get some idea to build the real future city in the Shenzhen in the China also. That's why this project is like the open source and open research that they can get into what the future of the people thinking how they want to build a city. That's why it's like the open source of the government for the China that they can get in.
From,
no. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay, so I mean, from like an urbanistic logic, also, by the way, I'm super compelled by the graphics and the way you present the project, the video, the way it's explained. Within your explanation or presentation of the project, there's something that was quite confusing to me. Is the last part of your presentation where you state that this is not like a utopian city.
Yeah.
I would kind of argue that I do think this is a utopian sort of idea for urban development. But nevertheless, it seems to operate in a way where it's maybe more efficient or coherent in a way if it was to be thought of maybe a plugin for an existing city, no, rather than as a new development from scratch. No, it doesn't seem to be relating anyway to a sort of a specific territory. So it makes you think of how can it operate as this sort of utopian plugin to existing cities, to existing urban developments within a utopian logic of operation, within a very let's say, efficient, no, and sustainable train of thought that could sort of be well handled or received or sort of could cooperate to a lot of, because most of the cities at the end, regardless of their location or so on, are dealing nowadays with more or less similar problems, no? And the sort of discussions from the planning offices sort of address this logic of how do we deal with waste, how do we deal with energy, and so on, no? So you think of certain cities that seem to have like their own plugins of very different realities of the way the city operates itself. No, you look maybe like Christiania in Copenhagen, no? And it seems to be in a way like a plugging of that city. It has nothing to do with the city, nevertheless, sort of offers a completely kind of utopian idea of a parallel universe. But in this sense, this is going straight into efficiency. So it would be quite interesting to see how this sort of layout can become a more or less flexible plugin that could relate to more or less any urban center in the world.
Yes, the idea of the clean the waste thing that I have put into this project basically is use the nature to clean the nature. Like if you have the wastewater, you just leak it, the wastewater to the grass field, and the grass is gonna absorb some wasting and clean the water, and then you can drain the water out of the city or reuse it again. This one is like the simple way that we don't need to build a new technology or the $100 of $1 million to build the machine to clean the water. It's like the simple way that you can get the clean water that is just cleaned by the nature. It's like the simple way that you can use it and plug into the, for example, like the city that is have the land available, and then the land is have the wetland. So that's why it's like this project is located near to the wetland. So I'm just use this idea to help this city. It will be same as if you wanna use this idea to plug into the another city. Yes, you can just look the city that have the similar environment that can use it, and also the energy. Like this city is have the idea of use the biogas to produce the energy. So the biogas basically is come from the waste product or the waste thing that is from the animal manure or the some trash, some trash, and we just use the go to the blend it and get the gas and take the gas to produce the energy, like to fuel the car or to fuel the air, the electric city to get the electrical. So that is like you can take this part like how to get the way how to get the electricity from the biogas to use to the another city like the farming that they already have the cloud to talenting. So you just get the cloud waste to build the gas to run the LED light in the warehouse, something like that.
Well, Paul, I have a question. Again, sort of just to echo everyone's point, I think the graphics and the presentation you've given is beautiful. But sort of looking at or comparing the game version of the city to the sort of potential build, I'm wondering about this question of narrative. What are the citizens of, or what's like daily life like for the citizens of City X? Are we imagining that these are like regular people with like jobs, or because I feel like day-to-day activity would have to change if you have to go and get eggs from the chicken coop or apples yourself from the hydroponic farm or wherever, right? So I think like if we start to think about like how people are going to live, do you imagine that there would need to be a sort of shift in terms of like home life, work life balance? Like, or are you imagining that sort of the normal like 9 to 5 is what is how people are going to be living, right? Is there like a more sort of I think Juan's example of Christiania in Copenhagen is a perfect example of that, where the people that live there live like a very like free or freer lifestyle than the people in the immediate surroundings of Copenhagen, right? So are the people that are going to live in City X living in a different way than the rest of China, right?
I can say actually the person who, the resident in this city is maybe a little bit different from the other city. Like, for example, we live in the Los Angeles. If we want to get the egg or get the vegetable, we just go to the supermarket. But this one will be like, okay, instead of go to the supermarket, you just walk to the backyard to get the fresh vegetable. Or if you want some product that you cannot produce it's like the milk or the egg, you just talk to the your computer in the home, and then they're gonna ship to you directly as you order from the Amazon right now. So instead of we walk to the supermarket, we just talk with the home assistant, and then they're gonna ship it to you. So you don't need to go to the farming to get the egg from the hen, or you don't need to get the milk direct from the cow. But this one will be but actually the milk and the egg will be product in the city, in the another location of the city, but they're gonna ship direct to you like 20 minutes or 30 minutes like that, because we have the tray that is run by the computer to ship it to you.
So I gotta just give you some advice. You don't want to be in the egg promising business. So, like, I think there's a bigger vision than I can get you eggs in 30 minutes that you want to like own.
But wouldn't it? It seems to me that going back to what Natu was asking is what kind of citizens are they? And the first, or one of the questions I would want to ask you is this only feasible in a very authoritarian community?
Right.
Because you talk about it in terms of actually having incredibly controlled life, that people have to act in a certain way. Not, first of all, they have to pass the test by doing the game.
Yeah.
you know, in order to learn how to live in the city.
Right.
And in terms of the amount of control that's exerted, I mean, this makes perfect sense in China currently. But it seems to be that in order for it to have any operability, it demands a very top-down system to it. And the one thing,
or a system where people are so homogeneous and so focused on the good of the group over the good of the individual in a way.
But it also implies a certain kind of stasis, that is to say, it's at a moment of complete fulfillment. Because what you don't show us is how did it get here and what happens when it gets here. That is to say, what happens when you get too many people? I mean, you know, what happens when you get a few more people? I mean, the difference, like, I mean, John talked about SimCity. I mean, one of the interesting things about SimCity is you actually had to start from zero and build your SimCity. And the more you put into it, the more compounding effects would go on. So you got a kind of, you know, a wave where it starts out small, gets bigger, gets to a kind of optimal position, but it doesn't take very much to push it over the edge, and then it starts to have internal conflicts, and you've got too much of this and too much of that. Yours, you know, which is very, you know, it's very plausible that you take it to the most optimal position, but, you know, in order to get to that position, it has to assume a fixity, you know, because in order for it to be optimal in its production, it can't have too many people and it can't have too few people. It needs a certain number of people to be able to do the work. So, you know, it's almost like everybody has to be helicoptered in at one moment for it all to just start and go. Right. Because I don't see, I mean, you do have a sequential, I mean, it's showing right here that first you put in the landscape, and then you put in the road network, and then you put in the buildings, and then you so on and so forth. But at the same time, it's all happening everywhere at the same time, as opposed to the traditions of a city. So if it's anti-traditional in terms of the history of cities, the question is, it seems to me, again, the solution or the way that's managed is by authoritarianism, that you have an outside source that, like the military, can plan it all in one go and make it happen in a very specific time frame, not let it evolve. So there's no evolution in this. There's only actualization.
Yes, I understand. I can answer you the questions about the resident who living here. For the job, they can be anything they want, and basically that this city can give them is like the facility that is like they can get it from the city. That is like the thing that city give to them, and they can be accounting. They can be the any tally that they need, actually, like anything. But this one is just like instead of you go exercise in the gym, you just go walk to do the farming, something like that. A little bit different for the exercise of the people.
I think the thesis is interesting because it's almost like an abstract diagram of urban planning, or the diagram that we should have in order to develop cities rather than having a plan and a zone map and a domination of what should be there. No, besides the proposal in itself, is the complexity to which how simplified could be human behavior if there would be a diagram to try to delineate the most important ones, and how that could inform urban planning decisions. I'm just wondering if the thesis lies more on the diagram and the quality of the diagram, the capacity of the diagram to convey the complexity of your interaction, but also making it quite sterile and normative. You know, this is how you have food. This is in which it's unthinkable that you would say that, but in a way tries to describe those activities that are quite complex into an overall picture diagram. So to me, that is where the project becomes interesting, when an architect tries to be an urbanist, and when it does not rely on words. The kind of works is not it's not a text on what the ideal city is, and what is the diagram of the city when that is three-dimensional and goes beyond the problem of the building, but goes into the dynamic quality of the vehicular access, movement of energy, resources, use of the resources, etc. So to me, that's what it's intriguing about the project, and how then aesthetically put together the diagram starts to be, which maybe gives the idea that this world could exist in an ideal state rather than in a complex reality full of failures and unpredictable relationships.
But I guess to that point, then it starts to question some of the assumed norms that are within the design of the city. We're looking at a kind of utopia, and within that bubble, then the shape of the city could be almost anything, right? I then start to question, well, why is it on such a fixed, like, 1-by-1 grid? Why does that make maximum efficiency? It may not, because that means every one of those blocks is a stop, right? Like, maybe you want kind of a different sort of design. And so in a way, the aesthetics of it start to maybe undermine sort of ideas of efficiency or sort of a better life, because it starts to sort of set out this sort of rigidness. But then I also think about, like, okay, well, what if we just take this grid, which is flying kind of in the face of, like, efficiency, and really pointing us towards kind of the pixelization of game culture. And then think about, like, the cybernetics of Cedric Price and the kind of flexible buildings or sort of cybernetic sort of ideas that he's thinking about. So I wonder, can one achieve a kind of utopian urbanism without sort of the building in of a flexibility, or without an acceptance that there is a conceit in the very logic of this particular city?
Mm-hmm. I want to introduce another vector at this last moment about time. And so not necessarily form, but time, because it does look like early SimCity to me. And SimCity and cities themselves, the biggest, I'm going to be super trite here, the biggest design constraint of cities is permanence. So you put something here and then it has to stay, and you can't put it there. And so as the system progresses, it becomes increasingly stagnant. That's what happened in SimCity, because you locate certain things and then you deal with the fact that you can't move them. And that's the game of the city. So what I like, or the promise of the city for me, is not that it's a grid or not a grid, or the actual locales of things, but this sort of notion of the modularity, that things could be like unplugged at various junctures. And then you get rid of, like, the one sacrosanct constraint of the city, which is permanence, which goes back to the Cedric Price thing, and that there would be a way of sort of plugging in or out. Like, that seems really profound in a way. I'm not sure that's what you do it for some of your building systems and not others. And I just think, like, an interesting path forward would be to, like, apply that plug-in to the infrastructure as well as the buildings. Because then I think you've actually done something that's, like, quite novel in the conceptualization of history for cities, which is, like, displace its permanence.
Yeah,
But even those modules, I mean, it's interesting, that one that just was there, the graphism of the presentation is that the modules are all the same scale, but the actual operation of what's happening on a module is a totally different scale. You had one module that had 2 people with a piece of trash or something, and next to it was a big power plant, which was exactly the same scale of the module and such. And the idea that you could move the modules around would then impact upon the very notion of what is infrastructure, because effectively you would have to imply that underlaying all of this is an infrastructure of infinite connections, that no matter where you put the power plant or the sewage plant, there's going to be the connections underneath that take it back to where they need to go. So again, I think there's a question of the layering, that this sits on a kind of magic carpet layer, levitating these modules, and you can kind of push them around. But for their actualization, there has to be another layer underneath that, which is the underground infrastructure of infinite connectivity.
Donald, I think that's super well said. I think he already implies it when he talks about his maglev scooters.
Yeah,
so there's
exactly.
a maglev infrastructure, which is frictionless, that allows everything to sort of slide.
Yes.
So I'd like to just poke in just for a moment at the end of this one. So I've been advising intermittently just on the theory side. And I was also confused at the beginning about where's the argument here. But I think in the end, the obsession shows itself pretty clearly in the way he demonstrates that this thesis is about aesthetics and communication. It's not about maybe any specific real smart city, but about a kind of like, I see it like the way it operates is kind of trying to make a convincing case to people who maybe aren't really ready to hear it. It's not so different, say, from the original document about garden cities from Ebenezer Howard, right? Like it was trying to evoke a concept to help people get their head around it in a way that would have a kind of embodiment that seemed accessible and made complicated things seem sensible enough that you could get on board with them. And I think on that level, he's constantly added new pieces to this project that try to add this kind of explanatory insistence on that. What is that kind of simplified Pollyanna, smart city, all the good things, let's save ourselves kind of rhetoric that we're all familiar with. But I think in the end, he's not owning that rhetoric. He's owning a kind of way of trying to make that argument through graphics and through these kind of various presentation modes, including the game, that would be able to reach an audience that maybe isn't able to understand everything that's in that package of a proposition.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Paul. And I just want to congratulate you. And this has been a great discussion. So thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we now have our final project. Last but not least, Wesley Evans.
Hi. So
Welcome again to the spin room of SCI-Arc Thesis 2020. I am here joined by Hernan Diaz-Alonso, the director of the school, and Damian Janovic. They have been both in reviews for 2 days, and we're going to talk to them about the past of thesis, the future of thesis, and how the medium of internet has somehow shaped our 2 days experience in the work. You will see in the background behind me coming up a series of images of the most important thesis I would imagine to be in the past 20 years of SCI-Arc. Not many of you know, but before Florencia Pita, I was the coordinator of thesis, and before me, it was Hernan Diaz-Alonso. And so I took the time to put together the slides that somehow are characteristic of this 15 years arc from the beginning to the end of thesis of today, so that you can see a trajectory in the work. While the slides will keep on going in the back, I'm going to talk to Hernan about the relationship between thesis and pedagogy. Because one thing that is interesting when you look back at the thesis that we think of being a success is, first of all, how outdated they become very quickly. But then the second thing that comes to clear realization is that the students that produce the most interesting thesis, the most critical thesis, the one that really truly we look back and we think this was a pivotal moment for the school, something happened at SCI-Arc that was special, something happened in the curriculum that shaped the curriculum afterwards, which really I think thesis at the best does, were individuals that went to practice as academic, actually. I call it specifically practice as academic because we produce a specific kind of students that understand practice as being a fundamental part of academia, but also that understand that academia has a role in their thinking as designers. And so I will leave to Hernan. The question is how thesis shapes the practice of an academic in their life at large.
The way I think we understand it on SCI-Arc, and like everything else that we think, there's a big chance that we're wrong, is that it's not as it's as much as the last project that they do in their education in the career as a student, but it's more hope in the best case and in the good cases, which is the cases of the one that we've seen in the screen, are kind of a launching platform for a trajectory and a way of thinking for each of the architects who produce it. So in a way, it became the first stone step to a professional intellectual development. This is nothing really that new. I mean, this has happened through the history of architecture. We've seen it in many cases in which a thesis is the origin of lifetime projects for architects and educators and thinkers. So I still think it has an incredibly value because first and foremost, I think it's a moment of in which each architect, each thinker have the possibility to reflect in terms of what is that curve of learning and what has been that path and how that cannot be put together or proposed in the form of a thesis and in the form of a project. And again, as I said, I think in the best cases, in terms of the aspiration, what we want thesis to be, it became the first steps towards a professional life, a professional career. So I think that's the best that thesis have to offer as a pedagogical, academic, and professional tool.
I know that when you started thesis, somehow thesis was not something that the curriculum had, and it was a provocation to tell you, you're going to institute thesis in the program, and because you did not believe in thesis. Do you believe in thesis now?
I do. I mean, yeah, it's true that the main reason was I was asked to coordinate thesis at the time was because I was very much opposed to the notion of thesis, particularly because we were going through a period of transition in which the massive eruption of technology and computer came to it. And for some strange reason, at that time I used to think that it was the collective or kind of a more the research oriented was the vehicle. But I come around big time. I come around 180 degrees because I really think thesis became this. It's an individual moment of reflection, but also it's a collective moment of reflection for the school, for the program, for the faculty. But also, I think it's important. It's a moment that the architect, the person working the thesis, take control of it. I always think that as a faculty, I think when you teach studios, the failure or success of the work is part of the frame of the studio, which I think in the thesis, if you take your job seriously as an advisor, it's just to be there to provide guidance to each of the authors. So I think there is an important value about thesis in finding each voice, but also finding the collective voice. And also it's a good place also for allowed all the different voices in the school to be expressed. I think I was completely wrong in what I thought at the time to have a kind of a desire for a more homogeneous way of thinking. And I think thesis is valuable because of that, because it produced a wonderful disruption of all the voices from students and advisors coming together, and also to have a healthy intellectual battle for the center of the discussion of the discipline. And I think this is absolutely vital. And I think thesis in many ways, in grad, but also in undergrad, I would argue thesis always became a moment of reflection of the school about where we're going with the curriculum. Because in a way, it's a combination of multiple years that we've been working on something collectively.
I couldn't agree more that the thesis by definition is a moment where one questions what we do as architects, and the students are asked these questions every year. I think somehow this year in a special way, it was true not only for our students, but for the school as a community that wonder what we do as architects in a moment where we're all working remotely, we are going through a social awakening, and there is a lot actually on the table for us to discuss on what we contribute to in terms of architecture. So I would say that it's true that the thesis is a moment of individual discovery, but I would say that there's a moment of institutional discovery and institutional rebirth. I have a question also for Damien. Damien, welcome to the SCI-Arc spin room. Thank you for being here with us. I think this year we had a very specific medium we work with, which is this medium of the television, the monitor, the screen, the digital, the internet is what we have to talk to each other and to be with each other. And I would like you to maybe to talk to us about the fact that maybe we're all eyes and ears right now, where there is no touch, there is no immersiveness, there is no wanderlust of architecture in the sense of space, but in a way it somehow maybe focused our senses onto two that are very important, and maybe narration became more important, maybe the visual became more important. Can you talk to us about this medium and how you see this limitation of today actually focusing maybe the work of the students?
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing that I really noticed in this batch, and also maybe last year when I was doing thesis as well, is that there is a kind of a heightened attention to this problem of identity and kind of personal expression within, let's say, the kind of the politics of platforms that people are inhabiting, right? And especially now when we are all kind of within this virtual presence kind of regime and everyone is constantly online, and there's an interesting dynamic, I think, happening also between the students where there is far less, let's say, hierarchical idea of how students talk between themselves and also how they talk to advisors on the one hand. But there is, I think, another thing that comes out of this is basically a question of how do I present myself and how do I work with these new technologies in a way where I'm not subject to the kind of the platform, default or to this idea that the platform is presenting me in a certain way. So I think what I've seen in my kind of batch was the attention to kind of personal really personal expression and this idea of kind of working with tools where tools are not anymore just simply used for some ideas of problem solving or some ideas of kind of just producing kind of known formats and kind of classical or traditional ways that we are making architecture, but tools are now becoming a topic in and of itself. And I think so software is also becoming a cultural force, and it's not merely a technical problem anymore. It's, I think that's where also Zoom and these kind of platforms where we are constantly, they will be used, they will be also misused, and they will be put into question by the kind of the best projects as well. So
I couldn't agree more. Even the virtual background has become a design project. I mean, even in thesis, I realized looking at what is starting to happen is that the green screen, the split screen, the Zoom backgrounds, the way in which we talk to each other, the way in which we organize the microphone, somehow things that we thought were defaults of software now are highly sophisticated. We look at them in a highly sophisticated way. We understand their limits and want to expand them. I mean, I think if at some point this was a digital bucket, the digital bucket actually is becoming, we have to put things in many drawers, and these affinities that we saw and we understood as being somehow under the same umbrella, now we're actually quite critical about how you can use them and how you can express yourself through that. And what about the role of narrative? I also find this interesting, what happens when you don't have an object in front of you, but you're a person that is expressing, their thoughts about a project. I think somehow it heightened also the problem of the narrative, how explaining a project became fundamental this year.
Yeah, one thing that I noticed with me is that I tend to keep track of where I'm looking at when a Zoom project is presented, and there is an interesting probably kind of pattern emerging where it's either at the project or even sometimes at my own kind of square. And I think there is kind of a tendency in Zoom that we are, we become almost like performers for ourselves, and because it's kind of difficult, I guess, to really project always in front and to be somehow faced with this lack of response, because sometimes it's difficult to know if someone is on the other side, really.
I agree with you. I think it was a man that was mentioning what it does to you to see yourself while you talk to other people. There is a psychological effect on seeing yourself while you express your ideas, and the control you're starting to have on your emotional trait on your face and what you start projecting outside. So I think I agree with you that this medium made us performers more than what we were aware. And maybe this is actually part of a thesis, meaning how do we control the medium of expression in a more sophisticated way to create an audience towards
I always remember that scene from a movie where an actor is kind of in front of a mirror and they're kind of preparing for the big role. And I think this is maybe what Zoom has brought, this kind of endless proliferation of individual actors that talk to themselves in some way. But I don't know, maybe that's...
Going back to Hernan, maybe Hernan, if you want to talk to us, but when we say thesis is the moment that we question things, I would say that we had a summer where we questioned the institution, and maybe these are something that you can speak to, because I think we have been questioned by our body of students, and I think their ideas and their input has been taken quite seriously from the administration. And in a way, I think this thesis has been a thesis for the entire institution. Like, we all graduate, I think, tomorrow, actually.
Yeah, I think when you are confronted with multiple crises at the time, like a pandemic, global crisis, the social injustice for Black lives, and lack of equality for minorities in this country and in many others, you have to ask yourself, what are you doing? What are your shortcomings? Why you haven't done? Why you didn't do what you're supposed to do, or you were not paying attention? So it has been, and it is, a moment of reckoning, but also it's a moment of awakening. And I think it's also an historical time. And I think it's an extraordinary time for us to rethink what is the role of the school, what is the role of architecture in all this, And I think we have to be very, very humble about it. And we cannot presume to have the answer. I think it's the moment to understand that this is the moment that we have to reinvent ourselves, or reinvent one part of ourselves, or to reboot certain things. So in a way, collectively, the students, the faculty, the staff, the people who we are with the responsibility to run the school, is a moment of reflection and questioning. And this is something I think any institution should do on a regular basis. But for sure, when we have this, and on top of that, we have the wildfires going in California, that is a permanent reminder of the ecological tragedy that we are living every day. So we have all this. We have these confluences of extraordinary crisis, and if we don't look ourselves in the mirror, if we don't ask ourselves what we're doing, what we should be doing, okay, so we don't deserve to be doing this job. So I think the way that you put it, that this is a thesis, that is the thesis of the school, that is the thesis the students are doing, but also there is a thesis that what is a School of Architecture on how we should do this. I think this is, in a way, we are at the beginning of the process. We are in the very beginning of thesis prep, and we have to work and develop a thesis for it, and be very, very open-minded and very reflective about it. So in that sense, again, this is a moment to elevate all the different points of view and on all the different questions. I think this is time to do that, and to reformulate, and to rebuild what we need to rebuild, and move forward what we need to move forward, and change and replace what is wrong or hasn't been done in the right way. So in that sense, it's not different than it is. So yeah, these are incredibly extraordinary, critical times, and in a way, is one way or another, I think, is a permanent state of an architect, and I think we have to raise to the occasion, and we have to confront it, and we have to fight for it, and we have to move forward and grind. And it is a lot of work to be done, but it's an interesting way to see it, that this is a moment of thesis. It's a moment to set up the future of it. So in the same way that we're talking about the thesis students being the beginning of the next phase, this is a time for us to be the beginning of the next phase, which of course is a reflection of things that you learn, but you want to produce a shock and produce things and push you and project you forward.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more, because we've been teaching for a long time. I think all of us, and you can see that the status of question and happens in the students when they start thesis. What should I be thinking about? How should I spend my time? And what is meaningful for me to do in this time frame? And I think the institution has done this during the summer, and in a way has been a collective thesis that was a participation of the faculty, the students, and the administration. And I think certain things has been brought to the table as proposition of things that need to change. And it was, I think, an incredibly powerful time for us. We are being joined by other two faculties, Anna Niemark and Mira Henry. They are both thesis advisor at SCI-Arc. They have been teaching in the graduate program and the undergraduate program for a long time. And they are advisors of our students, and they are coming out of the reviews to join us in this informal conversation. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Mira, for being here. Hernan Diaz-Alonso and Damian Jovanovic, they talked about the thesis as a trajectory for the students. With Hernan, we looked at the old thesis from 15 years and the thesis that somehow started the career of our students into teaching, actually. And with Damian, we talked about the medium of the internet, the performance through Zoom, and how that changes the narrative or the project. I think these are two questions that maybe also the two of you could talk to. And I would love to see or to hear the point of view of Anna. How do you see the thesis changing because of the medium of.
I think this is my cue to leave the spin room and go back to the news, correct?
Yes, I know.
All
You
right.
both, Damian and Hernan. Thank you for being here, and I appreciate you being here. And we'll move to the other guests that today will give us their view
Bye, Mira. Bye,
on
Anna.
thesis.
Bye, Elena.
Ciao. Thank you.
Bye, Hernan. Bye, Damian. And good to see you. And hi, Elena. Thank you for inviting us. It's really nice to be here.
So you know that I'm actually at SCI-Arc so today. So believe it or not, I am in school with the entire team. It's fantastic to be here.
Well, that's cool. That's very nice.
And I was hoping you could talk to us about how you see thesis changing this year, because of, I think one big factor is definitely the performance in front of the camera, the performance through the medium, and how I think this medium has changed, focused or reduced, making more creative assets for us to think about in terms of thesis.
No, it's a great question, Elena, because we've gone through so many different kind of shifts and avenues this summer. And one of them, of course, we started out the spring with the COVID-19 pandemic, which meant that we all had to go into our homes and isolate ourselves and work independently. And I have to say that for a thesis student, to work independently is what we ask of thesis students, but it's very mental. It's a mental space that they have to access somehow. And what kept everybody's sanity together was always the studio space. The studio environment is the collaboration of many individuals coming together and really working together. And that is very difficult to reconcile with the way in which we're working right now in Zoom. So that's something that, of course, we try to kind of produce dialogues. And I think that in some ways, like, there may be two upsides to Zoom. One has to do with us being able to bring in voices from all over the world constantly into our windows on a matter of minutes from a phone call. Somebody jumps in and comments on a project, which is amazing. The second one is a kind of side effect of, we're all at home in our comfort of our home. And so I see a student starting to smoke and somebody starting to kind of speak to their family member. There are different things that give us comfort in our own home. And that's something that we don't normally have in the studio space. Now, to shift a little bit and to speak to the other parts, in terms of the ideas that have come to the foreground as well that have to do with politics, I think that has been an even more powerful conversation, at least in my group, or in the group in the kind of, also at SCI-Arc in general. The Black Lives Matter protests, our own participation, our students' participation, our activism has really activated also many thesis projects. And I thought that was absolutely incredible. So, like, on the one hand, we have this kind of mode of isolation, mode of working kind of separately but together. And on the other hand, we have a way of coming together and actually collaborating and speaking to a bigger issue, to an issue that has a clarity of values and ethics that we have never shared before, I think. And I'm sure, Amira, I'm seeing that you're nodding. I want to kind of open it up as well, because I find that it has really transformed our ability as architects, like the conversation, the discussion, the energy surrounding kind of ideas of how to be engaged, the values of ourselves as citizens and ourselves as architects in our cities, really re-energized our students and our thesis work.
I was mentioning before to Hernan that the thesis is the moment where the students question everything. No, you question what is worth your time. First of all, you're opening the problem of thesis thinking, what is worth for me doing? And what should I be thinking about? And how does that, impact the discipline or impact the world around me? So there is this, I think there is questioning moment, and we could call it ethic, but I think it's wider than that. It's a doubt moment of this directing your energy, your practice, your intellectual capacity, your talent towards something that you think is meaningful and defining in your career. Is the moment where you go from being a student to becoming an architect. This thesis actually projects quite a bit into your professional life afterwards. We've seen during the career talks how much of the thesis is actually very still in the practice of all of us. And I was mentioning to Hernan that somehow this year is not only student questioning, and it's not anymore a quest for novelty on your own, like, oh, how can my thesis matter? How can my thesis be new? To a body of knowledge, a body of work that has been done before, which is a very hard task, by the way, to position yourself in a meaningful position within the rest of the discipline. I think this year it was a collective thought. So we are all questioning the position of architecture within the social realm. How, as an institution, do we respond to what there is around us? And I do think that somehow was a thesis prep for the entire school this summer. And maybe I was hoping that Mira could talk about this. I think has been a thesis prep for the administration, for the faculty, along with the students. And the students gave us their creative energy. You know, it's kind of a privilege to be able to see all the work coming from all the screens and computer generated vision, somehow the beams in your eyes. So they gave us their answer, but I think the school as well has produced, if not an answer, at least a sort of action towards those answers.
Mm-hmm. I call it the meltdown. That's what I think about this time. It's the meltdown. So, you know, the meltdown has produced a certain amount of clearing away, and there's been a sort of clearing away. And I think that it's actually, in order to, in a non-destructive sense, it's actually opened up. I think it's swept some things out of the way and opened up some space. And I've actually found that the level of conversation it's been kind of freeing, right? It's been kind of freeing to say, you know, like the values that are being, the terms of the work that I as a student and I as a faculty member, that what we bring has value, and to not assume that one needs to be constantly kind of returning back to, say, canonical conversations in order to be like make valid the thoughts, the feelings, the responses, the instincts, the sensibilities, all of these things. I mean, this has been quite liberating, quite liberating. And sort of, I felt it actually, the shift in terms of the way in which my thesis student and I kind of talked about things and how we valued them and like what was really at stake. Really what was at stake was developing a space of knowledge. And of course, this is always what we want. But there was something about this year that actually pivoted in a newly authentic way to say, I'm gonna slow down a little bit, and I'm gonna sit with some things a little bit longer. And all the deadlines they're gonna come. And I felt like that, but nonetheless, I'm still going to approach it in a way that is somehow filtered through my own experience, my own thinking, rather than assuming that the answers are coming from that which I've already read, that which I've already known. I mean, that is what has been powerful about this time, a sort of saying, a way of giving, you know, value and space for the voices of every single person, right? And that those things are somehow they belong in architecture. And that discomfort of that, terrible discomfort of that, right? Now the question is, how do we build knowledge around this? How do we build knowledge around the individual experience, right? In the relationship? That is a real question. I have total confidence that knowledge will be produced, that it will not be a sort of one-off and the sort of personal. I mean, there have been so many interesting conversations around students trying to grapple with like just the simple sort of isolation of their own space and also the desire to be able to put themselves into their work in new ways. You know, a sort of critique of that would be that this is just a kind of conversation around the personal, and it's very idiosyncratic and is no longer in discourse. And I think that fundamentally how we start to create conversations given that is really what's exciting about this time as well.
May I ask a question? Because I completely agree that it's a time for expansion of sensibilities that are actually there, frankly.
Yeah.
And they simply are more accessible. And I'm actually quite convinced that in a weird way, social media and had a lot to do with the liberation of of those sensibilities. If you talk about the aesthetic practice, that actually being able to express and having even just an audience that has the same feeling, and then expanding what we understand as being the canonical accepted norm into the multiple sensibilities that are there, is actually a lot to do with the platforms we're using for communication. I'm bringing this to you, maybe you have a different opinion about it. Do you think social media and digital tools and digital media of communication has a democratizing power? And is the democratizing power of these tools heightened also by this moment of isolation that we all have this platform to go by? And that creates a much more participatory process into the production of knowledge, aesthetic, and as a beginning ground for discussion. I'm opening it because maybe you have different opinions, so it would be great to hear what you think.
I would say yes in politics, no in architecture. Okay. And I'm sure I have a lot of people who disagree. So I would say yes in politics, because social media experience, as Mira is referring to it, witnessing, posting, making visible those kinds of power dynamics that we normally might not be aware of, has been the most powerful tool in the last few years. It has been the most powerful tool in politics, in news media, in also activism, and just kind of bringing people to see. We have to see, we have to visualize the violence. We can't just read about it in the papers. And even in the papers, we don't understand it until evidence is given to us, given over to us by the authorities, right? So in politics, absolutely. I feel like in architecture, and this is something that I found so fascinating, within our group of students with whom I worked this summer, the practice of working on a project, whether it has to do with ways of exchanging information, documenting the site, working with physical models and digital spaces, site documentation, interviewing, etc. Those practices haven't really changed. So maybe I'm in the minority here, but in the group in which I participated, studio culture persisted, and physical space and digital space were on par with one another. One didn't overshadow the other. And I think it's because architectural production had always already anticipated this remote moment. We always already were working remotely with digital tools, with experimentation that had to do with a kind of construct of a world that brought together the physical and the digital. And for the students, it was a no-brainer. It was just, we were going to keep working the same way we always worked. And they reproduced the studio environment in their kitchens, in their bedrooms, in their homes, next to a baby, next to their spouse, next to their roommate. And they were able to continue to document physical models, digital experiences, and produce even themselves as a kind of persona or avatar, as a kind of collaborator within a greater space of that kind of production, which I was so impressed with.
And Mira, what do you think? Social media have changed and has enabled is it a democratizing power for architecture as well as politics?
I would say, I'm not a positivist in this sense. I'm not. But there has been, there's been incredible collectivity. Aside from politics separate, but the collectivity of and I don't know about social media as much as just digital platforms have produced collectivities that I've experienced. I know that my students have experienced. As an educator and as a architectural thinker, have begun to kind of benefit from, and that comes from just being able to collapse the sort of spatial divide that Anna is referring to, bringing people together across the world, across the country, particularly when it comes to, collectivity. We need collectivity, particularly for marginalized voices. Collectivity is so important, and the role that technology has played in that and social media has played in that has been incredibly critical. So it's a piece. To me, it's not the answer. It's a piece of the puzzle. There's still, to me, I mean, the sociality, the physical sociality of architecture to me is still so critical as well. So, and I don't think that can ever be somehow eliminated, or like that will always become a part of it. I don't think that social media will ever be able to necessarily address that. And again, like questions of access, like all of these things, when it comes to certain kinds of platforms, I think that it's always a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I wouldn't be kind of hyperbolic in the way that I see its total effect, but I'm certainly enjoying a great deal of connectedness with people that I wouldn't have otherwise. And I think that that actually is a form of building a way of beginning to build knowledge.
No, I mean, on my side, I do think that has been an incredibly powerful force, and I think to me is also a powerful force when it comes to visualization of what is allowed to be visualized. I mean, what is the democratizing power of the aesthetic of tools like Instagram, to me, has changed our visual culture, has allowed for different spectrum of colors to exist in the realm of architecture. Actually, I do think that we could not underestimate what is the visual effect that certain things have on us. We're cultural animals. We are influenced by what we see, and I think what we see is much wider than what we used to see. We are also joined by Christy Ballier. I think she's coming to our Zoom, and thank you for being here, Christy Ballier. So first of all, I would like to introduce her because she will take on thesis coordination next year. So this is your last year as just being an advisor. Next year you will have a much harder task.
Having a summer.
Yeah, the last time in the summer, so enjoy it until you laugh, if we can call it summer. So, Christy, welcome to the discussion. Anna and Mira have been talking to us about a few things. One is the role of social media, or in general, digital tools in thesis and how they have impacted the work of the students, and maybe in a larger scheme of things, how they are a democratizing force, if there is or they're not, in terms of what they have done in general for thesis and in general for the SCI-Arc community, and maybe some thoughts also about the fact that this is a moment of recollecting thoughts for the students and questioning what they should be doing. And I would say that the school at large, the administration, faculty, and students has been going through a moment of coming to terms with what we've done in the past, what we have to change for the future, and how things move forward from here now. So we're also joined by John Cooper, who is now joining us from England. I think for you it's middle of the night. Thank you for being here. We enjoy waking you up or keeping you awake at times that you should be asleep, but you know, I didn't sleep anymore. I know, that's the beauty of this connectivity. So John Cooper and Christy Ballier will both be the new thesis coordinator next year. So we're doubling up on this because we thought Florence Pita did an amazing job, and we needed 2 people to replace her, and also because we have high ambitions for the program. And so we think that one person cannot do it, we have to have 2. And so John Cooper joins us from the history theory side, Christy Ballier on the design studio side. One is more on the Mark 2 and Mark 1. So somehow we're trying to get a wider spectrum of voices and, you know, also change the format of thesis as we have been doing this year. So John, Christy, this new medium, which is not new, has been there for 20 years, which is this internet computer thing that we have in front of us that for now is the only thing we have to connect us. How did it change thesis? Did it change thesis or not?
I definitely think it has impacted, and I guess when you impact something, you also change it in many ways. The one that maybe is most significant, it might also just be the one review that I'm just coming off of the student Taiyan Wang. He, I think increasingly we've been talking about, I mean, I think the world has been talking about, but we've been talking about how when you have an idea, when you represent that idea, when you communicate that idea, how can it reach more audiences, many types of audiences? And I think even though that's probably something we've been talking about for a long time, the fact that you're packaging your presentation for something that can go onto a website, can be presented on Zoom, I think has the students already thinking about the audience of the critique, of the jury, of the discipline, but also has the students thinking about how the things they're producing can immediately go out into the world via YouTube or via their own website. And I think that's had a really, in a lot of ways, a positive impact, that the students recognize that what they're producing isn't going to be just seen within the walls of the school, but that it immediately will be seen by many types of people sitting in many different places.
Are we all eyes and ears now, and there is nothing else than those two senses now that we are seeing each other through a screen? So is it all about the visuals and what we say about it? And no more tactile, no more textures, no more touch? Or does it take another form?
No, I think that's just kind of phase one of like the kind of new existence. And I feel that I don't think that screens and digitality and social networks are the only way that we have to connect with each other at all. I think there's a million other ways. And I also think it's not just about the eyes and the ears. And I think it might sort of feel like that, but I think that's just because it's phase one. And I already see people now getting kind of sick of phase one and wanting to take it apart and do other things with it. And you know, we've had students who've been working, say, on sound, and like switching. I was just in a review when the visuals were switched off, and the jury was told to close its eyes. And actually, that was a kind of really radical move for everybody to enter into a sort of different state of alertness. And then the sensorium, you know, suddenly sound becomes intensely physicalized. Like it has a kind of ingrained corporeality, and then something like an architectural voice emerges, which kind of makes you tingle, and then your capacity to be provoked, seduced, revolted, distressed, and so on is heightened. And so that seemed to me an instance where the screen and the kind of mediation through the screen was sort of like subverted or rerouted by the audio. And so I think what one might see going forward is like ever renewed attempts to reclaim the territory of the body from top to toe, and not just the one body, but the many bodies cohabiting in new ways beyond the Zoom backdrop. And that, I think whatever happens with quarantine and access and whatever, I think sort of the going out into the field is, and I don't know, maybe even this has been spoken about before I arrived. I feel like in that kind of Margaret Atwood post-apocalyptic way, how do you continue to navigate and explore and kind of investigate? To me, that's the real interest of like the next phase two.
Oh, are we gonna see avatars next year? The body, the new body, whatever embodied by so the digital body and the image of the body will come. I can see that we're gonna have an avatar at SCI-Arc next year. I always wanted one. I've been asking this for 5 years to Hernan. So we need an avatar to embody our school and to do reviews and somehow to learn from us and to reproduce our knowledge. And maybe then going back to the physical world, how, Anna, do you see the role of the physical model, which I think has been an incredible part of SCI-Arc thesis for a long time. I mean, the spectacle of thesis, I would imagine, if I would have to say in a very banal terms, lied a lot on the crafts of the artifact and the sense of wonder. How could they do this? How could they create this aesthetic quality? How could they imagine this formal expression? And the physical presence of those objects did create an aura and a desire and an audience that was so specific to thesis at SCI-Arc. So how do you imagine that could be or still exist or change its format now, given the situation that we are in? So how can the physical model still exist? I'm asking because I think a lot of your practice is based on this nuanced quality that I think you have to be in presence to see. I mean, it's a close reading of those objects, which I think you do with the students, and they're quite fantastic for that reason.
It's a great question, Elena. I absolutely agree that we can no longer touch the physical model, but the physical model, as we understand it, always comes to us through the medium of photography, in fact. So one thing that we have maybe learned to appreciate this summer is that there's no such thing as a physical model without its photographic representation. And we learned this very early from Thomas de Mant, and we learned this from every single article that we read where we are encountering models that no longer survive and that have been documented in some way or form through photography. And so we'll see this throughout the weekend. We'll see students sharing their modeled spaces. We'll see them live kind of imaging ways of working and moving through these artifacts. But we'll also see very careful constructions of these models, and we'll see a kind of representation of representation of representation. We'll see the kind of like very layered space of production of that lens of visuality, right? So like we'll actually understand how to look at something because that point of view has already been established through the image. And that's something that, you know, we always get in the portfolio. We don't always get it within the space of the thesis because we always think of a thesis as a live experience. We don't always consider it as a kind of archive of a project that's already been finished. But that's something that we'll definitely encounter this weekend.
Thank you, Anna. We've been joined by Donald. Thank you for being here. I am going to ask the question that I asked. Do you have thesis in your school, first of all? Do you?
You're asking me?
Yeah, I do. Yes.
Yeah. Well, our last semester. So we have a 3+2 system. So 3-year undergraduate degree, and then a 2-year master's degree. And there are 4 semesters in the master's degree, and the 4th semester, the last semester, is called thesis. But we run it in 2 different ways. So we have thesis studios. So we have just basically regular studios that are working under a project. And, there's about 15 or 16 students in a studio, and they do their own project under that kind of group direction and such. But they have particular requirements in terms of a publication that they have to put together, in terms of deliverables, in terms of scale of production, and so on and so forth. Then we also, for maybe less than 10% of the students, they have an option of doing an independent thesis where they determine their own project and effectively write their own brief and their own research theme and develop it. And then they have a supervisor who helps try to guide it along. And so,
and if you would have to describe the role of thesis, would you imagine that the thesis in your school is more about research, so it's more advanced in terms of specific research body, or it is a personal endeavor? Meaning, how do you see this in your school, and how do you see this comparing to SCI-Arc? You've been in reviews today, so I'm sure that you have some thoughts about this.
Well, I mean, in a way, it's both. Certainly we expect the thesis students to state a kind of supposition and to do research. So to back it up with, whether it's looking at precedents, whether it's looking at a particular historical tendency, whether it's, finding out information, like one of the ones that we saw today was about a kind of full new self-sustaining city. So we would expect a student doing a project like that to have done enough research to say, well, for 100,000 people, you need to grow this many tons of vegetables, or you need to have this much meat, or you have to have this based on population, blah, blah, blah. So there would be a certain level of supporting documentation, but it's not research in the sense of it's a scientific research program. It's still a design project. So we expect them to develop the design as a design proposition, but the research component is the kind of backgrounding and support framework for the issues.
And so if you would have to summarize, what do you think the pedagogical role of thesis is in the curriculum? What would you imagine that to be? I'm going to ask this question to all of you guys, John, Christy, and Donald. I think it would be great to hear from all of you about this.
Well, I think we do it at the University of Melbourne, RMIT does it, where usually the notion of the thesis is beyond a project. So, you know, a regular project is something usually, first of all, that's given to you, given to a student. It's couched within the sort of directionality of the studio and it's the studio's interest. And then there is the individual student's response to that. Whereas with the thesis, we expect students to, even when they're working within the studio, to develop their own trajectory and to take ownership of their own trajectory as a response to that. But we also expect them to a certain degree, kind of state the conditions of the thesis. So there is an obligation to, and I should add to that, we expect it to advance knowledge. So as opposed to just being a exploitation of students' work, that it actually advances a degree of knowledge.
And so, John, what do you think the role of thesis is in the curriculum?
Well, many roles, and I think that depends a lot on the individual basis. But you know, I guess I did my thesis in a kind of art historical academic context, where there was a very strong emphasis on research. And it seems to me that the most successful thesis projects I've seen, they genuinely go out and find out about something in depth, in real depth. And I think there's a lot of times when the kind of research element of studio work, it has to be rapid. And there's a value in doing that rapid, prolific research. But I think with a kind of a year-long project, you have the opportunity to go really, really deep down into something and to get through layers and misapprehensions and challenge the fundamental basis of your knowledge, have it tested and tested over and over again, until you really get down to some ineradicable core of knowledge that you can then identify with and make the basis of your intellectual, personal, communal growth for a long time. So I'd say it's that sort of prolonged research to get down to some ineradicable thing. Because I caught the end of a discussion about kind of social media and stuff earlier, and I feel like everybody is subject to so much external vicissitude. So easy for oneself to get taken out of yourself and distracted and to kind of covet other things and forms of attention and recognition. And I feel the thesis project is actually a way of kind of turning involution, turning inside to identify something that you can kind of protect and mask within yourself, so that whatever happens outside, pandemics and all kinds of whatever, big difficult things, conflict, trauma, whatever, you can carry on that research project through all of it and kind of grow and be elevated because of it. So I think that thesis is where you can begin that.
And what about you, Christy? How do you see the problem of thesis in the curriculum? How do you imagine, what do you imagine to be the role of thesis in the curriculum?
Yes, sorry, Donald, did you want to say something?
Look, I was just going to say, I think that question of time is actually really important because our thesis is done in a semester, which is really 12 academic weeks of work, 13, 14 weeks. Whereas, when I taught at the AA, one of the great things about the AA was that you do a whole year project, whether you're a second-year student or a fifth-year student, whereas our student work is cut up into semester times of 12 or 14 weeks. And it's hard to do any authentic research in the first 2 or 3 weeks and then do the project. So I think having a whole year to develop a thesis is a vastly different operation than trying to fit it into a 12 or 14 week span.
Yeah, I agree. I think I love that we have the longer period here and that it caps off the curriculum. I think to answer your question, Elena, I think one of the major roles that I see it having within a curriculum is that it is the moment when a student can dive deep into a topic that can allow them to become more confident as a designer, to be able to host conversations about a topic that I love how John said, that they've been able to kind of develop internally that gives them something that they can lean back on at different points and that they can develop on. And I think that I would just maybe add to that I think as a designer, figuring out different ways to develop confidence, and I don't mean arrogance, but to have a confidence that you have an internal project that you are working on, that you then can communicate sometimes through a project that might be building based, but in other times you could communicate that project that you're working on in a conversation, in a paper, in an article. And that by knowing what you're working on, it also allows you, I think, as part of a curriculum, the students to begin to understand who they might be in conversation with. Historically, but also in their contemporary realm. I think now more than ever, a student could be working on a problem. They can look around in the school that they are in, but they can also look to contemporaries outside of the school that they're in to see what types of conversations are happening, to find those other folks that might have these similar micro interests that I think is something that I don't necessarily think we had access to when I was doing my thesis. But I would say now, that's a huge part of the conversation, that you have the confidence of the project you're working on and that you're able to kind of host a conversation or be part of a conversation with others, peers.
Do you think there is a collective thesis at SCI-Arc? I'm asking this question mainly to Donald, maybe even John, people that somehow haven't seen thesis in depth because you're somehow outside of the institution. I mean, John, I know you've been here for a year and you've been looking at some theses, but I do think that you still have an outsider role in a way. You're not in it enough to be complacent. My sense is that it's much easier from the outside to see a collective project. Is there a collective project at SCI-Arc? And if that is the case, what is that?
If you mean collective, you mean for the whole of SCI-Arc? I mean, or as SCI-Arc as an entity, or?
Yeah, as an institution, what is it we work on? It's clear, I think, in thesis to see, okay, sure, each project is different. This project is personal. This project is a personal moment, but in reality, it isn't. Truly, it is a collective endeavor, and it is, and there are threads, I think, that connect them. And I was wondering if that's the case to you too, and if that's the case, how do you see it from the outside?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly like most schools, there's a kind of plurality of directions, but at the same time, there are characteristics that are identifiable and such. So I think, there are aspects to the work of SCI-Arc that both set it apart, but also identify it in terms of both thematics, but, and it is quite clear, particularly at the thesis level, that a lot of it comes through, and I mean this in a really complimentary way, it comes through the role of the supervisor, that there are strategies, techniques, interests, propensities that the supervisors have, and therefore I'm sure that the students gravitate to those teachers exactly because of that, but then the work sort of carries on that trajectory exactly because the questions and the critiques would probably most likely follow along some of those same lines of inquiry and everything. So I think there definitely are. I mean, I'd probably be a little bit hard-pressed right at this moment to identify them, but they certainly exist in terms of the kind of hyper visualization, hyper real, not hyper real, but I mean the use of graphics, whether that's animation graphics, whether that's pure visual graphics. You know, there's very little, although one of the reviews I was on yesterday was sort of like housing typologies, looking at, you know, kind of more or less conventional housing typologies and following that through. But I would say that a lot of the work is doing a lot with visualization and kind of confrontation with imaginative visualization. So not at all trying to render photorealism, but actually anti-photorealism, and yet make it believable as an experience or something.
What about you,
so
John? What do you think? What do you think is a collective project, if there is one? I'm putting you from the outside because I do think you have a view still. You're still far enough.
Well, I suppose, yes. No, what I've heard, what Donald just clearly articulated, I feel I've heard in different ways articulated at other times. And that represents some kind of a synthesizing tendency. Whether that amounts to a collective institutional project, I don't know. That could be a trait and a series of affinities and converging tendencies, but does that amount to an institutional project? I'm not sure. I think the very nature of an institutional collective project is, I think, probably up for redefinition right now. I don't know whether that means adopting something like a shared kind of ideological front. I don't think so. I think actually the school, well, maybe all institutions kind of thrive on a certain carefully curated antagonism of ideologies. But I would say that there is a sense in which there might be, and this is something I would say that is perhaps adventitious in the sense that it might be emergent, it might be kind of coming, but not here yet, but a sense that all tendencies must be engagements. And I think that, to me, that is what just in the time I've been here, this like last 12 months, the emergence of a coming kind of shift maybe to recognize the power of all of those visual characteristics to translate them into engagements, entanglements with real world situations and problematics. I don't know whether that's whether Elena, you would agree with that, or Christy, but that's just
I just think it's good to ask, because sometimes when I look at the work, I think there are projects definitely that we don't do. I mean, as an institution, and there are projects that when you talk to the students, they have this clarity about, okay, this is not a SCI-Arc project. This is something that we don't do. The project of SCI-Arc is such. No? So it's about novelty, it's about visual engagement. So there are certain things we do very well, I think, and certain things we don't do. And sometimes I find it interesting to ask who comes from outside is what the meta project is, because I think there is, and I agree there is a carefully orchestrated antagonism of voices, but I think at times it came actually quite together. I mean, I think the variety of voices was a decision making, and also when they converge to one voice, it's also decision making of the ingredients. But to me, it's very interesting to see from outside what do you see, because we are sometimes very close to our heart when we look at our students' project, and from the outside, it's clear that there are much bigger umbrellas under which we all are. I was wondering if, Christy, you have also an answer to this. Do you think there is a meta project at SCI-Arc or a few meta projects, and if it is the case what they are, or if that's not the case, and it's always a singular project. I think there are allegiances, basically, what I'm trying to say. And although we craft this as a singular project of the student that is going through a certain questioning, and the question is personal, in reality, actually, there is a much bigger component of almost like a tribe of ideas coming together. Yes. But what do you think, Christy?
Yeah. I don't know that I have the fresh eyes anymore, but I can recall, my introduction to SCI-Arc years ago was by invitation, coming as a juror to thesis. And I can recall at the time, I wouldn't say that there was, and I wouldn't say it then nor now, that there's a single collective project. But I would say that it was very clear that there were projects that were in dialogue with each other, that the students were, there's a certain positive sense of kind of, I don't know if competition is the right word, but that they recognize students who are working on a similar topic, and they are able to, I think, figure out how to differentiate the thing that they're working on from someone who may have a similar interest. And I think that always struck me as really positive, that I could leave here and say, wow, I saw like 4 or 5 projects that were working on X. But I think the students have a sense of responsibility and ambition to make sure that while they're in conversation with others, that they find an aspect of the project that they can go narrow into. So that they can, the best thesis for me would almost be able to say, I know that there are others that are working on this problem in this way, and I'm working on it in this way. Or they're choosing to begin with these priorities, and I'm selecting to begin this process with these priorities. And for me, that ability to both know your surroundings, know your who you're in dialogue with, but also be able, and maybe that's related to what John was saying, that like build some type of internal project that you recognize is your own, even though it needs to be in dialogue with a broader group of people.
I definitely think that thesis is a moment where students take what they've learned and produce a variation of that. I think it's clear that because of the structure of thesis and because of the fact that who teaches thesis usually teaches core, that's to me it's very important, that connection, so that the fundamentals that they've been taught in core, they go into the most advanced project where the students are much more mature and they take that problem and they make it their own. Therefore, they diversify. There's a delta. There is a gap between the fundamentals that they're taught to what they come out with. And the fact that the students and the faculty work together at the end of the career, at the beginning of the career as well, I think creates a loop of change in the school, so that whoever teaches the fundamentals also teaches at the end of the core, at the end of the whole curriculum, which means that they are exposed to the change and how their project goes into the hands of somebody else's project, and therefore gets enriched and changed, and then they go back to core with a new vision, a new facet, a new shade of this. I think it actually is an engine of change. I think thesis has been the engine of change of the core, and I do think there is a fast moving animal. I think it moves sometimes even faster than what we would like to do, because sometimes you have to be with a problem or with a subject for some time. You invent and you change, and it's a fast moving pace. I want to thank Christy, John, and Donald for being with us today at the Spin Room, for their thoughts about thesis and the future of thesis. We started with Hernan talking about the past 15 years of thesis. We had like a memory lane of the projects that had been done that were pivotal to the creation of the curriculum in the school, and we end with the new coordinator, Christy and John, because their ideas will somehow shape the next steps of this important moment for the curriculum of the school. Thank you to all of you, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.
we had more time, we could live forever. Just you and I, we could be together. That's life. If we had more time, we could live forever. Just you and I, we could be together. That's life. If we had more time.
It makes me think of that place.
I remember. We used to listen to that song for days on end.
I couldn't get it out of my head.
Oh, well, it brings back memories.
Have you heard from Josephine?
She was always running.
I was always swimming.
I would have loved to swim, but I had to work. Who do you remember?
I remember John and Dario.
He asked me to marry him.
I'm not surprised.
Do you remember Lou?
Well, of course. She took care of everything.
She was very much like my grandfather.
She knew how to enjoy life.
Shouldn't we all? What about the hurricane?
Well, the whole city shut down.
Yes, but my lights were still on.
They always were.
I didn't know it at the time.
Time changes everything.
quédate mi familia. Ahorita yo puedo ser una pelota. 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 Ay, yo quiero ser pura, yo quiero ser pura vera. Pero quiero amar el desastre que es mío. Yo quiero acabar, encontrar el camino. Y después no quiero entrar, no quiero correr de este paseo. Y después no quiero entrar, no quiero correr de este paseo. Ahorita yo puedo ser una pelota. 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 Every